Hello, my name is John Bell. I joined the International Wizard of Oz Club in 1976, and the next year the club published the 1977 issue of Oziana. This magazine contains a story that had been written many years before by Robert R. Pattrick. Robert Pattrick was born in 1926. While growing up during the Depression in California, he suffered a bout of scarlet fever, and he became a fan of Oz, of comic books, of science fiction, and of Sherlock Holmes. And he wrote about those things in his career as a librarian and researcher. He was an early member of the Oz Club, but then he died in 1960 at only the age of 33. 3 years later, the club published a collection of his nonfiction essays about Oz called Unexplored Territory in Oz. And then 14 years after that, the Oz Club published his short story in Oziana 1977. So I'm going to read it to you now. It's called Glinda and the Red Jinn. It is an origin story for one of Ruth Plumly Thompson's characters, Jinnicky, the Red Jinn of Ev. And it begins with a note from Robert Pattrick. Dear Oz friends, one of my favorite pastimes is browsing in old bookstores. Through the years, I have bought many books in these stores. I have accumulated so many, in fact, that the time finally came when I simply had to get rid of some. While I was at the task of sorting through them recently, I accidentally jarred the shelves and knocked several to the floor. As I picked them up, I noticed that the binding of one of them, an old Oz book, had broken loose. Inside it, to my complete amazement, was a manuscript. It was written in script and was in very poor condition. But by handling it gently, I was able to read the first page. I hadn't read more than a sentence before I realized that I had made a priceless find. For this old manuscript was none other than an early, hitherto unknown chapter in the history of Oz. Needless to say, I made haste to copy it before it disintegrated completely. The pages which follow are that story. I have given it a title, for there was none on the manuscript, but I have otherwise changed nothing. I hope you enjoy reading it as much as I have enjoyed it. Sincerely yours, Robert R. Pattrick, Glendale, California, October 1955. Glinda and the Red Jinn. A long time ago in the land of Oz, before Ozma became queen, Glinda the Good was the most powerful sorceress of all. There were many evil magicians and witches in Oz, but they were careful to keep far away from Glinda. Glinda lived in a magnificent ruby palace in the Quadling country, of which she was the ruler. 100 of the prettiest girls of Oz served as her maids of honor, and a corps of girl guards was her efficient, although seldom needed, army. Many hours each day the sorceress spent studying and practicing all different types of magic. Sometimes this required the mixing of liquids or powders in jars and dishes. One day, while working with a charm with green incense, Glinda found she had no extra jars. Dear me, she said, this is important magic. I must have some more jars. Leaving her laboratory of sorcery, she summoned her chamberlain. I need more jars and jugs for my magic powders, she told him. Where can I get them? The chamberlain scratched his nose, his left ear, and his right eyebrow while he thought. Then suddenly his face brightened. There is a pottery maker who lives in a small village in Ev, he said. He is an excellent craftsman because he uses magic. Glinda looked surprised. A potter who is also a magician? This is very interesting. Send my chariot for him at once. Because it is a magical instrument, Glinda's swan chariot travels extremely fast. Therefore, it was but a few hours later when the chamberlain came to Glinda's laboratory and announced the arrival of the potter magician. Bring him here, instructed the sorceress. Perhaps he will demonstrate his magic for me. The chamberlain bowed and went out. A minute later, the magical jug maker appeared at the door. He was short and very plump, with a ruddy complexion and long red hair. He was not young, yet he was not old either. His eyes were pink like a rabbit's, and they twinkled so, and his expression was so jolly, that Glinda liked and trusted him instantly. Welcome, O wizard, she said. The little man bowed low, and set down a large wicker basket which he was carrying. Alas, he said, No wizard am I, mighty sorceress, just a Juggins, Juggins the Jugmaker. Glinda looked puzzled. I was told, said she, that you are a magician. Juggins nodded. A magician, yes, but a wizard, no. 'Tis true I have a little magical skill which I use in my business, but that is all. This reminded Glinda of her reason for summoning the Potter. I understand that, magic or no, you make the finest bottles, jugs, and jars in all the world, she said. Juggins beamed broadly. True, quite true, he nodded. There is no need for me to be modest about it. With a little bit of magic, plus my own remarkable talent, I am able to make jugs and jars that are superior to all others. For example, and to Glinda's astonishment and amazement, he turned to his basket and proceeded to take from it jars and jugs of every type and description. Here, he explained, is a cookie jar that's never empty, and a milk pitcher that's always full. Here is my pepper pot, which instantly supplies either red or black pepper. Also my hot and cold water bottle, which is either hot or cold, as you desire. There's a teapot, which pours hot tea in winter and iced tea in summer, and furnishes cream, sugar, or lemon. These jelly and jam jars supply as much of any flavor as you wish. And last but not least, in this lovely flower pot, which gives a different kind of or color of flower every day of the year without repeating even once. He stopped, out of breath. Very good, said Glinda. Very good indeed. Tell me, how did you acquire this remarkable talent? Juggins's eyes twinkled merrily. I was a potter when Oz and Ev were enchanted, he explained. I was brought up to be a potter, and I enjoy being a potter. So I determined to become the best potter of all time. Accordingly, I sought out the two clever Evians who lived nearby, Mr. Smith and Mr. Tinker. From them I learned the marvelous magic which enables me to make these wonderful things. Your determination and achievements are to be commended, said Glinda. I am quite sure you will be able to help me. But, she interrupted herself, I am being most rude. You have just completed a long journey, and a story nearly as long, and I haven't even offered you a glass of water. She took a large jug from a shelf and pulled out a glass full of water, cool, clear water, into a ruby goblet. Then she handed it to Juggins, who took it gratefully and drained it to the last drop. A little smile was on Glinda's lips as she took back the empty glass. Then she asked a question. Have you ever thought of becoming a wizard, Juggins? Oh, dear me, yes, replied the fat little Potter. I think I would rather be a wizard than a potter. He blinked rapidly. Then, almost as if he couldn't help himself, he continued, it has been long a dream of mine to own a castle and have loads of jewels and servants and do real first-rate magic. But who would ever teach me? Smith and Tinker aren't in Ev any longer. None of the wicked witches or wizards would, for fear that I would be a good wizard, and the good magicians won't, for fear I might be bad. And a large pink tear rolled down his chubby cheek. And what would you do, Juggins? Asked Glinda softly. Juggins opened and closed his mouth several times, quite rapidly. Finally he spoke, almost reluctantly. It would be fun to be a fearsome, wicked wizard and have all the country around shake and tremble at the very mention of your name. Yes, it would be such fun, but... And an expression of confusion came over his ruddy countenance. But I just couldn't be wicked. I'd have to be a good wizard, he finished with almost comic resignation. Glinda smiled at him. I am pleased to hear you say that, Juggins. What if I teach you magic? The little Potter's eyes opened wide. It would be a great honor, he managed to stagger, but how could you be sure that I will use magic only for good? Glinda laughed merrily. Your first lesson, Juggins, she explained. The water you drank was from the Truth Pond in the Winkie country. You couldn't tell a lie. In the days that followed, Juggins proved an extremely apt pupil. His knowledge of the magic of jugs and jars became even greater until he was even more skilled in this phase of sorcery than was Glinda. He quickly mastered the properties of powders, liquids, and incense, and then delved happily into the mysteries of red magic. Finally, after many, many months of study and work, Glinda declared that Juggins was now a full-fledged wizard, and ready to assume his duties. But I cannot still be Juggins the Potter, said the little magician. No one would respect me as a wizard. That is true, replied Glinda. You must adopt a new identity. Have you any ideas? Yes, admitted the wizard. I have. First, I shall be a red wizard, because I learned red magic in the Quadling country. And also because my hair is the right color, he added with a merry grin. I should like, he continued, to retain some reference to jugs and jars, because I use so many of them in my magic. From your books, I have learned of a group of magic-working creatures in the mythology of the outer world, who are closely associated with jugs and jars. They are called genie, or jinns. They are supposedly sealed up in jars and come out only when the lid is removed. Slightly puzzled at all this, Glinda continued to listen with great interest as the little wizard explained his idea. But, he said importantly, I propose to become a sort of djinn. I shall be inside of a jar, a big jar, large enough to fit my present size. By means of a magical transformation, I shall make the jar actually part of me. Glinda was both astonished and pleased at this remarkable plan. Astonished because it was so unusual, pleased because it was so clever. But will a jar be comfortable? She ventured to ask. The wizard patted his plump sides. Quite comfortable, he chuckled. I will be as snug as a turtle in its shell. Then, continuing with the details of his plan, he said, in keeping with my role as a djinn, I shall have a huge red glass palace, hundreds of black guards and servants, and a divan of cushions instead of a throne. The palace and servants can be supplied quickly with some simple red magic, commented Glinda. But your transformation will take somewhat longer. Would you like to begin? Any time. Now, sooner if possible, cried the little man excitedly. Glinda smiled, and summoning her chamberlain, gave orders that she was not to be disturbed for the next 4 hours. Then she and the Red Wizard entered the laboratory of magic. They set to work preparing liquids and powders, magical instruments, and looking up powerful incantations in old volumes. Glinda put a huge cauldron over the fire and poured many strange ingredients into it. In a couple of hours it was 3/4 full of a bubbling, boiling mixture which changed colors faster than the eye could identify them. This was allowed to simmer slowly for a little while longer, as the two magicians worked with another magical apparatus. This was a large light, which Juggins stood below it, and when it was turned on, put forth a powerful red-tinted glow. When the little sorcerer stepped out from it, his entire body continued to shine faintly pink. Then he sat down on a low stool inside the magic square drawn on the floor near the cauldron. Glinda took 2 flasks filled with liquid, one gold and one red. Pouring the liquids into the cauldron, she chanted a magical spell. A pink cloud rose from the potent mixture and completely enveloped the magician. Glinda concluded the chant, by powers old and forces dread, by Evian gold and Quadling red, I bid thee change! And the cloud burst in a soundless flash of brilliant red light. The wizard sprang up in delight. It worked! It worked! He cried. He spun and turned round so Glinda could see him from every side. His entire body was now encased in a ginger jar of gleaming, opaque red glass. From 2 openings near the bottom protruded his legs, clad in red leggings and slippers. Through the other apertures at the top of the jar, he poked his chubby arms and round red face. His eyes twinkled brighter than ever, for now they were glistening red glass. And topping all, perching like a jaunty hat atop his long red hair, was the jar lid. Glinda laughed merrily as he popped in and out of the jar like a big red turtle. But there was one more thing to be done, and she quickly reminded him of it. You are now completely transformed, she said, and no longer Juggins the Potter. It remains, however, to give you your new name and position. But first I must explain something. Many, many years ago, when Oz and its neighbors were enchanted, Queen Lurline appointed me inner guardian of Oz. It is my job to protect this beautiful land and its people from those who study and practice magic wickedly. This takes much time and study, and I cannot extend my influence beyond the deadly desert. At this moment, 2 powerful threats to Oz and its neighbors are developing. Within Oz, 4 wicked witches are becoming increasingly powerful. It is my job to guard and work against them. Across the desert, the king of the gnomes has enslaved the royal family of Ev. Unless he is stopped, He will take possession of Ev and eventually invade Oz. I believe Queen Lurline foresaw such a happening, for she included as part of my duties the training of pupils. You are my first, and it will be your job to oppose the Gnome King. Therefore, Glinda picked up her ruby scepter and tapped the Red Wizard on the lid, saying, by the authority invested in me, and in the name of Her Majesty Lurline, Queen of the Fairies, I hereby christen, dub, and appoint thee Jinnicky, the Red Jinn of Ev. And then there is a postscript. At this point, the manuscript ended abruptly. Although there were no numbers on pages, and the story was written or on loose separate pages of some kind of parchment, still I had the feeling that this was only part of the story. We know from the later history of Oz that the Gnome King did not invade Ev, nor did he attempt to invade Oz until many, many years later. There can be no doubt that the Red Jinn was the reason the wicked little metal monarch did not succeed in his evil plans. And it is my firm belief that the story of their meeting formed the second missing portion of this manuscript. There is no way of telling which store the book came from, or even when I purchased it. Perhaps even now, somewhere in a Los Angeles bookstore, there is another old Oz book with the rest of the story hidden in it. I shall not cease to search for it. And that was Glinda and the Red Jinn by Robert R. Pattrick from Oziana, 1977. Thank you.